While the U.S. has blamed China for the outbreak, the global response has been rather tame. Let me show you a quick headline up here from the New York Times. It says, bowing to pressure from Beijing, the EU softened their initial criticism of China in a report detailing disinformation on the outbreak. Do we need our allies to take a greater stand against China? Well, let's ask Fred Fleitz. He is the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy and, more importantly, the former chief of staff to the National Security Council. Fred, welcome back.
Sean, Lindsay, good to be here.
So here's the question for you. So, you just saw that headline in the New York Times that when the EU wanted to go out and say that they needed to crack down on China, China said, you might not want to go too far. Water that language down. And guess what they did? They watered it down. So why are not more countries willing to band together? Has China got that much leverage on all of us?
Well, it's a good question. China does have a lot of leverage on these other nations, and they have threatened trade sanctions against states that criticize them in even the mildest way. But I think the situation is changing. After the New York Times ran that story on it was an EU report on disinformation about the virus. There was a lot of criticism of the European of EU management for doing that. I also note that last weekend, the Australian press put out news of a Five Eyes report. This was an intelligence report, an international report by the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, that highly criticized the way China has handled the virus, for covering up what happened, and for taking steps that basically robbed the world of crucial time that could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
You know, Fred, Germany wants China to pay. I know some states in our country want China to pay. I'm sure other places want China to pay because of their cover-up and deceitfulness. They let this virus spread and cause a lot more damage and potentially, more deaths. Is that realistic at all? I mean, is China just going to say, great, nice PR stunt, we're not paying you a penny?
Well, it's interesting. A German newspaper wants China to pay Germany 149 billion euros. A UK think tank thinks the UK should get 351 billion euros. And the government of Australia is calling for an international investigation. I think pressing China to pay is the right move. I don't think in the end they're going to pay, but we really need to maximize pressure on China to get a thorough, objective investigation of what happened in Wuhan. Chinese diplomats are saying there's no evidence proving it came from Wuhan or that we were in the wrong. There's evidence, but evidence is not proof. The evidence is mounting that China is responsible, but we don't have proof because China won't allow an independent investigation.
Well, not just an independent investigation, they won't let anyone there. So there was this request, I think, to get the WHO folks in, and they said, well, not to things get tamped down. By the way, you're supposed to tamp them down, and a couple weeks ago they told us that the outbreak was subsided in Wuhan, so they got to figure out which it is. Part of the reason I think we have a problem is because we're not united, and let me show you a clip from Congressman Adam Schiff when he was talking about this intelligence and the need to get under it. Let me show you what he had to say.
I think what they're clearly trying to do is deflect attention away from the administration's terrible mishandling of this virus and all of the false narrative that the president was putting out early on about this going away on its own, being no worse than the flu, that we're going to contain it down to zero. And so they've chosen to go after China. Whether they can get the intelligence agencies to somehow search for the conclusion they want to reach, that's not how the agencies are supposed to work. And there's a danger in the administration either putting out theories that cannot be substantiated or deliberately provoking a fight during the middle of a pandemic.
So, Fred, I've got a two-part question here. The first part is, do you think that it doesn't help that people like Schiff, who heads the Intelligence Committee in the House, is immediately not siding with the administration, who is saying that we need further investigation? It's not just a question of, and I think you are right, do we know definitively? Because part of the reason we don't is because they won't let anyone in to investigate. So shouldn't we demanding a full investigation on a bipartisan basis?
We should, but it's a shame that Democrats in Congress long ago gave up objectivity in foreign policy because of their hatred of President Trump. They've blocked almost every foreign policy nomination. They drag their feet on everything. Their whole purpose right now of their lives is making sure that the president does not win in November. They're not going to agree with him on anything. And they're joined by the mainstream media, which has been grossly neglected in not focusing on China's role. There's some exceptions to this, but if you turn on CNN and MSNBC, it's all about Trump's responsibility for the pandemic, and they say almost nothing about China.
So there are some folks on the right who say that when Schiff says what he's saying, and to your point, some of these other media outlets report it the way that they are, quote, using Chinese talking points, Chinese Communist Party talking points. Is that a bridge too far, or do you think that that's an accurate description of what they're doing?
I think that's right. And I might note a recent Politico story that said that the president is losing very badly in China on tweets. Well, first of all, I don't think Twitter's even covered in China. But why Politico would rely on anything that China says? And the mainstream media is guilty of this too. I think deaths from the coronavirus in China are probably 10 times higher than the Chinese government is reporting. And I don't see how Democrats or the mainstream media should take anything at face value that the Chinese government says about the virus. You know, we were just talking to Senator Tom Cotton, who's probably been one of the leading voices on this. One of the things that he's also been outspoken on, and we covered it with him, is that the number of Chinese students, which is now over 350,000 a year, coming to the United States to study, when a lot of them are actually stealing our technology and intellectual property. How much of a concern do you think that is? It's a huge concern. These students are chosen very carefully. They study certain disciplines that are useful for the Chinese military and Chinese companies. They bring this technology back. I think they are stealing technology. If the Chinese people want to send their students here to study, I think there had to be some ground rules. And the first ground rule is that the Chinese government has to agree to a thorough investigation of the origins of this virus. And we all know wealthy Chinese, they all want their children to study at Harvard and Princeton and Columbia and Stanford. Well, I think we need to shut that down. If we allow it to continue at all, there has to be Chinese cooperation on an investigation of this virus. Totally agree. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your insight into this. Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, when we return, despite mounting evidence, we will continue the conversation. Why aren't congressional Democrats joining the Republicans in condemning China? Our company is going to weigh in next.